So recently, I wanted to test myself a little bit by seeing what would happen if I took one sample and flipped it into 2 separate beats in 2 different genres. So I grabbed the sample from my Sugar and Steel sample pack, set a 2-beat challenge, and tried to see how far I could stretch my creativity. Whether it was rap, R&B, trap, or pop, I went in whatever direction my creativity and inspiration took me in. Let me show you what happened. So obviously the first thing that I needed to do was pick the sample that I worked with. And I went with this one called Cinematic Dreams. One of the things that I really tried to do with this sample pack was make a bunch of different compositions that gave you a bunch of different options to work with. Some of these samples could have been 2 or 3 loops if all I did was change out 1 or 2 instruments and then just transpose them. So the first thing that I did was I loaded up Serato Sample and I made some manual chops. And then from there, I'll usually start playing around with the sample chops and rearranging things. And this is what I came up with. And then from that point, 9 times out of 10, once I find my sample chops, I immediately go in to try to add the drums. Those are some solid basic drums, but one thing that you can do to level up the drums in your beats is take a live drum loop and then layer it with your MIDI drums. So I took a drum loop from a Producer Grind production suite that I've worked on in the past. I chopped it up so that it could work with my MIDI drums. And then I added some effects to it so that it didn't overtake them. Mainly the deep and wide drums preset from Guitar Rig 5. And then I used Transient Master to bring down the transients of the drum loop. So that way it's not phasing out and clashing with the MIDI drums. So the next thing that I did before I moved on to the hook was I decided to add some effects to the sample. The first effect was this EQ to kind of shape the tone of the sample. The second effect was the RC20 just to get a little bit more dirtiness to the sample. And then the third effect was a chorus effect that I got from Sigmund. And as you can hear, aside from the subtle sound design aspect of it, that also gave the drums a little bit more space to kind of cut through the mix. So here are the chops that I decided to go with for the hook. And for the most part, I kind of kept the drums the same. The only thing that I really changed up was I moved the position of the drum fill chops and then I added a simple. Then I felt like the hook just needed a little something extra to, you know, add a little bit more impact. So I kept it really simple and I added a piano stab from Nexus. And then the last thing that I did for the hook was I added this reverse cymbal as a transition effect to go into the verse again. So 9 times out of 10, the last thing that I'll work on for a beat is the intro, but that doesn't make it an afterthought. I've seen a lot of beats get skipped in the studio with major artists just because the intro didn't hit right. I've both heard and made beats where the intro might have been some kind of combination of too long, not enough build up, or too much build up, and then the beat itself can't match up.
That's what she said.
That's my joke, damn it.
And so for me, the reason why I pretty much always work on the intro last is because until at least the skeleton for the beat exists, it's tough to know what you're gonna be building up to. It's kind of like trying to write an intro paragraph to a story if you don't know what the plot is. And so for this beat, it felt like the best thing to go with was the sample chops for the hook. So now I'm just gonna bounce everything out of FL Studio, bring it over into Logic, and then show you guys what everything sounds like when you put it together. If you're a producer looking to level up your beats with some high quality sounds, I got you. I'm giving away nearly 100 sounds, including multiple samples from different genres, drum breaks, instrument loops, and melodic one-shots. And all you have to do is send me $5,000. I'm kidding, it's actually free. Let me show you what's inside. 10 hard-hitting 808s, 13 instrument loops to help spark your inspiration, 50 melodic one-shots to add to your music arsenal, a royalty-free sample pack just because, and a bonus sample pack with hand-picked samples from the Hill Sounds, including 5 neo boom bap samples, 5 soul samples, 5 trap samples, and 5 vintage samples. Saying all of that kind of makes me feel like if I wasn't the boss, I'd get in trouble for giving all of this stuff away. Just hit the link in the description and let me know where to send your sounds. So right now you might notice that the lighting is a little different in the studio, and that's because I started this video last night. And somewhere in the middle of recording, I got the genius idea to make the next beat on the Maschine, just to switch things up a little bit and make it fresh. I actually got this Maschine from Native Instruments back in 2023 after doing a sample pack for their sounds.com platform. But here's the crazy part. I never got the chance to actually sit down and figure out how to use this thing. And honestly, I didn't think that this video needed to turn into a full watch me figure out how to use the Maschine from scratch type of thing. But anyway, after a lot of trial and error and a few YouTube videos, I finally figured out how to chop samples on it. So here's what I came up with. So after laying down those sample chops, I thought they sounded pretty good, and it kind of gave me the vibe of like a late 90s, early 2000s R&B record, something like A. Marie would do. But like I said, this was my first time using the Maschine, so instead of taking even more time and trying to figure out how to make a full beat in there, I decided to bounce out the chops that I made, and then I brought them over into FL Studio. As I was listening back to the sample chops, I started to feel like the beat needed to be a little bit faster, so I sped it up from 75 to 89 BPM. But then I felt like I kind of wanted to create a little bit more space for an artist to be able to add their vocal. Because when you listen to a lot of R&B records, especially from the 90s, one of the things that you're gonna notice is that whether there's a sample or original instrumentation, during the verses, they actually had a tendency to pull back a lot on the melodic instrumentation. And it kind of had two purposes. One, it would really help the artist's voice to really cut through the mix. And then two, when more instruments started coming in the chorus and the bridge, you would notice it a lot more because they were absent during the verses. So since I'm using the full sample and not the stems for it, to kind of get that effect, I added the halftime plugin. Then I decided to add some drums. So really nothing super crazy, just a kick, a snare, a hi-hat, and a clap. And then I just tried to make sure that the drum pattern had that 90s kind of R&B groove, where it was kind of like a mix between hip hop and rhythm and blues. But then to make it a little bit more modern, I also added a couple of 808 hits, just to keep that bottom end that people are accustomed to feeling today. Then to kind of round out the verse and also solidify that late 90s to early 2000s R&B groove, I added this sub bass that I got from Reactor. Oh, and then last but not least, for the verse, I added this bell tree, just to make it sound like kind of magical when the verse comes in. So remember, in the verse sections, I kind of wanted to pull back on the melodic instruments. So on the flip side, in the hook, I wanted to bring them out a lot more. So I automated out the halftime plugin, but then I pulled up the Decimort plugin to use the low pass filter, but just a little bit. Because even though I want the instrumentation to start to shine through a little bit more now, I still also don't want it to get too much in the way of an artist's vocals, as well as any other instruments that I decided that I wanted to add on top of it. So the next thing that I did for the hook to kind of make it sound a little bit more full, and also to kind of make it feel like the beat is telling a little bit of a story, I added this string line from LA Scoring Strings, but just enough that you could get the effect and not so much that it's kind of taken over. Now I kept the drums mostly the same, but the bass does change up and it gets a little bit busier. And then the last thing that I added for the hook was these Rhodes. And then now we get to not just my favorite part of the beat, but really one of my favorite things about R&B records from the past in general, which is that they had bridges. Having a bridge on a record from back in the day was really kind of a way for the artist and the producer and all of the musicians to really drive home the point of the song, whether it was melodically or thematically. And so my way of trying to do that here without overcomplicating things was I started off with some Rhodes. Then I decided to layer that with some piano, but I'm playing the piano a little bit more. And then you know it wouldn't be a 90s R&B record if I didn't add a pretty soft synth lead. And to get that sound, I actually went into the Mini V plugin and I designed it on my own from scratch. So just like with the last beat, I went ahead and bounced it, and then I brought it over here to Logic to do a quick mix. The only other thing that I really did here in Logic was I made an intro, again, not as an afterthought, but because it's a lot easier to make a decent intro when you have the full idea of the beat. By the way, if you want to try your hand at flipping the sample yourself, I left the link where you can download it in the description. And also, if you want to learn how to make your own vintage samples that don't just sound but feel authentic, go ahead and check out this video right here.